Do you ever look at a car and think, how have they possibly made something look this good? This is the modern day Alfa Romeo 33 Stradale, and I think you'll agree with me, it's an achingly pretty car. Second only, I think, to its predecessor, the original Alfa Romeo 33 Stradale. A strong argument for the notion that cars can be art. But much like a Singer DLS with its artistic interior or an Eagle low-drag GT with its swooping lines and retro touches, the Alfa Romeo Stradale is part of an exclusive club, full of cars that are designed to be as special and aesthetic as possible. It's a really great example of car design at its peak, and it's really refreshing to see cars like this still getting designed in a time where car design has become either aggressively pointy, oddly droopy, or just straight up unoriginal. And yes, not everything can look like a sports car, but even among sports cars, some look better than others. So what gives? What makes a car look good? Well, that's what I want to try and answer in this video. So let's get into it. Part 1. Proportions. And I want to start by talking about a very iconic car, the Ford GT. Even though it first came out in 1964, it is still considered one of the best looking cars of all time, despite actually having a very simple design. It's a really good example of proportions done right. A low, flat profile, a long and wide body, all sitting on large wheels pushed right to the corners. It's as though they drew the outline first and then colored in the details from there. It's the very embodiment of the idea of stable, flat, and fast. And because of these simplified but exaggerated proportions, it still leaves a striking impression half a century down the road. When we look at something, our brains can't help but immediately start looking for outlines to assess what we're looking at. We make a lot of choices on what something is and whether something looks good, purely by its silhouette and outline. But specifically when it comes to cars, there are some common ingredients for the recipe that makes a good looking outline. A long hood, an integrated cabin that widens and flows seamlessly into the rear of the car, and lastly, relatively large wheels sitting full within the arches. For example, a Jaguar F-Type works on this formula, a Toyota Supra works on this formula, even a Ford Mustang works on this formula. I think you're starting to get the idea. Despite the era that a car might come from, nailing some of these basic proportions can make for essentially a very iconic look. And the more exaggerated these proportions, the more confident the design, and often the more striking the resulting car. That's why certain classic cars like the Alfa Romeo Stradale, the Corvette Stingray, and yes, the Ford GT still look so good decades after their production run ended. But because they nail the basics, they can afford to be simple. They are, in a very literal sense, simply beautiful. But while on the note of simple, nowadays it is very hard to design a simple car. Cars nowadays are full of complexity and LED light strips, which, whether that's good or bad, is a discussion for another day. But even though nowadays cars can't really operate on the same design language as 40 years ago, luckily we are still in a phase where every year there are still a handful of really good looking cars coming out. But among this modern era of car design, if you can't rely on proportions alone, how else do you make a car look good? Well, that brings us to point number 2, flow. More specifically, visual flow. It's an idea from the world of graphic design and essentially refers to the path that your eye takes as you look at something, whether it be a website or an artwork. And usually your eye will sort of get led by lines, shapes, and even colors. It's become particularly relevant in the world of user interface design and web design, where everything revolves around what you see and how it makes you feel. Ideally to a point to get you to swipe your credit card, but you gotta respect just how artistically some designers manage to go about it. For example, the Lando Norris website is an absolute treat in this regard. But anyway, back to cars. As I've talked about in a previous video, car designs in the late 2010s and early 2020s have become increasingly pointy and aggressive. Even a family Mazda now spends its days glowering at anything that comes too close. But despite this, a lot of designers have taken advantage of sharp lines to create visual flow. And once again, to bring up the Jaguar F-Type, it's technically a very pointed and angular car, and yet it's very curvy. All the lines sweep this way or that, they flow into one another, each angle a transition into the next one. It's the kind of design that encourages your eyes to roam across its surface and never really fixate on just one point. If a car gets your eyes to roam around and never really hit a dead end, they've achieved good visual flow, and that is very satisfying to look at. But in the case of bad visual flow, that can almost feel like a form of whiplash. A line that starts aggressively and then just kind of dies, or event that exists purely for drama. This is where some cars end up looking busy more so than beautiful. There's a lot to look at, but there's not much to follow. And it's at this point in the conversation where I would like to bring up Lamborghini, because they are known for their sharp, pointed, angular designs, and yet somehow they still nail flow. On paper, it's all straight lines, wedges, and sharp angles. There's almost nothing traditionally curvy about it, and yet your eyes glide over it effortlessly. Every line reinforces the same idea: forward motion and lots of drama along the way. They achieve flow by making sure nothing contradicts that overall direction of forward, and that's how they maintain design clarity. So even though the details might be loud and the colors might be glaring, they're still really good at achieving visual flow, and this is something you can see even from a distance. A Lamborghini's silhouette is really hard to miss and to not recognize. But with all that being said, there is a third element to all of this, which is a little bit less about how something looks and more about how it makes you feel. Which brings me to part number 3, emotion. And this is the hardest part to explain because it's the least technical, but I would argue it's also the most important, especially when it comes to cars. How you go from a sort of a shell of metal with moving parts to a piece of art is by giving it a little bit of heart along the way, by making it a little bit human. And what I mean by this is you can kind of tell when a designer really cares about the final product, about how that car is going to look and feel, because they make a lot of taste-based decisions instead of just engineers optimizing for airflow or marketers trying to tick all the boxes for the focus groups. You can sense when a car was designed by committee, and you can sense when it wasn't. There's no way you can look at something like the Alfa Romeo Stradale and tell me that thing doesn't have a beating heart inside of it. Recently, my YouTube feed was blessed by 2 fantastic videos by separate creators, both centering around classic Alfa Romeos. They are both more than worth the watch, but a big takeaway for me from these videos was that as much as these cars were far from perfect, they had really heartfelt stories to tell and meant a lot to their owners. Emotion in car design usually shows up in the small, irrational decisions. A headlight shape that doesn't need to be that elegant, a body line that exists purely because it felt right. There are choices that don't always make sense on a spreadsheet, but they make all the difference in how a car feels. Great design almost always takes a risk somewhere. They lean slightly too far into elegance, drama, or personality, and because of this, they end up being memorable. That's why some cars can age beautifully, and others look outdated as soon as the newest model in the range drops. Because when something is designed to be special as opposed to just trying to sell well at the time, it has the ability to actually outlive the design language of its time and become a little bit more timeless, a little bit more iconic. Not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. And it's that kind of sincere design and that genuine want from some people to try and make something special that makes me fall in love with cars again and again. So next time you see an especially good looking car driving past, remember this: good proportions make for great impressions, visual flow brings the whole look together, and a bit of emotion makes that beauty more than just skin deep. And if you enjoyed this breakdown and you are interested in design or why we like the things that we like, I think you might enjoy some of the other content on this channel. But with that being said, I hope you found this interesting, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.